All right. My friend, listen up, you brilliant menace. Yeah, you. The one who's been quietly observing, absorbing, calculating while the room kept underestimating you. The one who smiled politely while they talked around you, not realizing they were standing next to a loaded weapon disguised as patience. Let me greet you properly. Welcome to the moment they never prepared for. Welcome to the second where the fog lifts, the noise dies down, and something clicks so loud in their heads it rattles their bones. Because today, whether they admit it or not, they finally see you, and it terrifies them. For a long time, you were the too much one. Too intense, too quiet, too deep, too unpredictable. You didn't play along the way they wanted. You didn't move on their schedule. You didn't explain yourself enough to make them comfortable. And they mistook that for weakness. They mistook silence for emptiness. They mistook restraint for lack of power. That was their first mistake. You see, while they were busy chasing approval, you were building pattern recognition. While they were reacting emotionally to everything, you were studying human behavior like a chessboard. While they were flexing loud confidence, you were sharpening a mind that doesn't need permission to dominate a room. And then it happened. That look, that pause, that sudden awkward silence where nobody knows what to say next, because it finally clicked. They realized you don't just think differently, you operate on a completely different level. You see angles they can't even comprehend yet. You connect dots they didn't know existed. You hear what isn't being said. You notice who shifts uncomfortably when the truth walks in. And the scariest part for them? You didn't even raise your voice. You didn't have to prove anything. You didn't need a dramatic reveal. Your presence alone exposed the gap between surface intelligence and God-level perception, between noise and clarity, between ego and awareness. That's when they stopped interrupting you. That's when they stopped joking. That's when the energy in the room changed. Because people don't go silent when they're unimpressed. They go silent when they realize they misjudged someone dangerous. You've been underestimated your whole life, haven't you? Labeled late, labeled different, labeled difficult, labeled not living up to potential, by people who couldn't recognize potential if it punched them in the throat. You learned early that explaining yourself only made them more comfortable dismissing you. So you adapted, you observed, you waited, and patience became your unfair advantage. See, a God-level mind doesn't rush. It doesn't beg to be understood. It lets people talk themselves into exposing how limited they are. It lets egos burn out. It lets false confidence collapse under its own weight. And when the moment arrives, when the truth finally surfaces, it hits them all at once. Oh, that's what you are. That realization is brutal. Because now they have to reprocess every interaction they ever had with you, every time they doubted you, every time they talked down to you, every time they assumed you were behind when you were actually 10 steps ahead, watching the whole thing unfold like a dark comedy. And you feel it, don't you? That shift in how they treat you, the way they suddenly listen more closely, the way they hesitate before speaking, the way their jokes don't land anymore. That's respect born from fear, not the cheap, loud kind, but the quiet kind that crawls up the spine and whispers, "Be careful." You don't need to dominate conversations. You don't need to flex intelligence. You don't need validation. Your mind does damage by existing because you're not just smart, you're aware. And awareness is what dismantles illusions. Awareness is what exposes lies. Awareness is what makes manipulators uncomfortable and fake leaders nervous. Awareness is why some people feel watched when you're in the room. even when you're saying nothing at all. They sense it. They sense that you see through systems, hierarchies, social games, and fake moral posturing. They sense that you don't buy the narrative, that you're not impressed by titles, money, popularity, or volume, that you understand how fragile their masks really are. And here's the part they'll never admit out loud. They thought they were smarter than you. They thought they had you figured out. They thought you were predictable. Now they're standing in silence, realizing they never even understood the rules of the game you were playing. You didn't change. You didn't suddenly become powerful. You didn't level up overnight. They just finally caught up enough to glimpse what's always been there. A mind that doesn't need chaos to feel alive. A mind that can sit in stillness and still dominate. A mind that knows exactly when to speak and when silence does more damage. You're not loud because you don't need to be. You're not flashy because you don't need witnesses. You're not desperate because you already know your worth. And the reason they're speechless now, because there's nothing scarier than realizing the quiet one was never confused, just calculating. And the wildest part is how late the realization came for them. Years late. Moments too late. Because while they're standing there replaying old conversations in their head, you're already somewhere else mentally. They're stuck trying to understand how you slipped past their radar, and you're already seeing 3 outcomes ahead, adjusting your posture, your tone, your timing like instinct. Not rehearsed, not forced, just natural, like breathing. You've always had that edge where your mind doesn't shut off when the room gets loud. It sharpens. The pressure doesn't crack you. It clarifies you. When things get messy, people spiral. You zoom out. You see structure inside chaos. You hear intention behind words. You catch contradictions mid-sentence and file them away without reacting. That's why arguments never really pull you in emotionally. You're not trying to win noise contests. You're watching patterns. You're watching who panics, who deflects, who over-explains, who suddenly gets defensive when a simple question lands too close to the truth. And when you finally speak, calm, precise, almost casual, it hits like psychological whiplash. Because they expected volume, they expected arrogance, they expected ego, they didn't expect clarity. That's the moment their brain short-circuits. That's when the room tilts just a little. When someone who thought they had authority realizes authority doesn't come from position, it comes from perception. And your perception cuts deep. You've been walking around with a mind that reads between lines, through people, past excuses. You see how systems are rigged, how power really moves, how most people are performing confidence instead of embodying it. You clock manipulation instantly. You feel when energy is fake. You know when someone's smiling because they're threatened, not friendly. And you don't call it out. You let it sit there. You let it rot in silence. That silence messes with people more than confrontation ever could, because confrontation gives them something to push against. Silence gives them nothing but their own thoughts echoing back at them. That's where insecurity starts talking. That's where they begin to unravel internally. They start wondering what you know. They start questioning what you've noticed. They start censoring themselves around you. That's power without effort. You don't chase relevance. Relevance chases you the moment they realize you've been aware the entire time. You don't need to announce intelligence. Intelligence announces itself when it disrupts expectations. And the truth is, you've been holding back more than they'll ever understand. Not because you couldn't dominate earlier, but because you understood timing. You understood that revealing everything too soon just feeds egos that don't deserve access to your mind. You learned restraint the hard way, from being misunderstood, from being talked over, from being doubted by people who couldn't even sit with their own thoughts for 5 minutes without distraction. You learned that not everyone deserves the full version of you. That access is earned, not given. That's why when they finally see you clearly, it's jarring. Because it forces them to face an uncomfortable comparison. You didn't need constant validation to grow. You didn't need applause to stay focused. You didn't need permission to evolve. You built quietly while they were busy being seen. And that God-level mind of yours, it's not just intelligence, it's composure under pressure. It's emotional control. It's strategic empathy. It's knowing exactly how far to push and exactly when to pull back. It's understanding people deeply without being controlled by them. They sense that you're not easily influenced, that you can't be baited into nonsense, that emotional manipulation slides off you because you already recognize the tactic before it finishes forming. That's unsettling, because people rely on predictability. They rely on patterns they can exploit. And you broke their pattern by not reacting the way they expected, by staying grounded when chaos was invited, by staying sharp when emotions were supposed to cloud judgment. You're not cold. You're not detached. You're disciplined. And discipline in a world addicted to impulse looks like dominance. They didn't lose their voice because you intimidated them. They lost it because their internal narrative collapsed. The version of you they created in their head no longer fits reality, and rewriting that story hurts. It bruises ego. It exposes blind spots. It forces humility where arrogance once lived. And you feel that shift every time they hesitate before speaking, every time they choose their words more carefully around you, every time they try to test you subtly just to see if you'll slip. You don't. You stay steady. You stay observant. You stay 3 steps ahead. Because a mind like yours doesn't need to announce its presence. It changes the temperature of the room just by thinking, just by being aware, just by existing exactly as it is, unfiltered, unbothered, watching everything unfold with that calm, knowing half-smile that never explains itself. Because that half-smile isn't arrogance, it's recognition. Recognition of how predictable the world becomes once you understand people are mostly running scripts they didn't write themselves. You see it in meetings, in families, in friendships, online, everywhere. Same reactions, same defenses, same fragile egos dressed up as confidence, and you clock it instantly. You've noticed how people talk louder when they're unsure, how they over-explain when they're lying, how they laugh a second too late when something hits too close. Those micro-signals never escaped you. You didn't learn this from books alone. You learned it from watching, from being underestimated, from sitting quietly while chaos revealed its own blueprint. That's why you don't rush to fill silence. Silence works for you. It gives people enough rope to expose what they're hiding. They start talking just to break the tension, and every extra word gives you more data. You're not zoning out. You're mapping the room in real time. You've been called distant, intense, hard to read. That's just what people say when they can't control the narrative around you. You don't give them emotional shortcuts. You don't react on cue. You don't reward manipulation with attention. And that lack of access makes them uneasy. Because control requires predictability. And you're anything but predictable. You can feel the shift when someone realizes they can't push your buttons. They try sarcasm, guilt, praise, pressure. Nothing lands. Not because you're numb, but because you see the move before it's played. That awareness creates space between stimulus and response. And inside that space, you choose. Most people don't choose. They react. You decide. That's the difference. And when people finally recognize that difference, they don't confront it. They retreat. They reassess. They go quiet. Because challenging someone who's emotionally regulated, mentally sharp, and unbothered by approval feels like shadow boxing. You've lived long enough being misunderstood to stop correcting the record. You realized something critical along the way. Clarity doesn't need defending. Truth doesn't need volume. Power doesn't need permission. The more grounded you became, the less you needed to explain yourself to anyone who was committed to misunderstanding you anyway. You felt that moment when someone starts talking to you differently, more cautious, more respectful, less dismissive. They don't even know why. They just know something's changed. It hasn't. They just finally caught the signal you've been broadcasting quietly for years. That signal says you're not easily moved, not easily fooled, not easily shaken, and deep down, they know you see through their persona. The curated version, the highlight reel confidence. You see the cracks they work so hard to hide. You see the fear behind the bravado, the insecurity behind the dominance, the emptiness behind the noise. And instead of exploiting it, you simply don't engage. That restraint hits harder than any verbal takedown ever could. Because nothing scares people more than realizing the person across from them understands their weaknesses and doesn't need to use them. That kind of self-control rewrites the power dynamic instantly. You've learned to trust your timing. You don't jump at every opportunity to speak. You wait for precision. You wait for impact. When you do say something, it lands clean because it's aligned, not emotional, measured, not messy, honest, without being reckless. That's why your words linger after conversations end. People replay them. They think about what you meant. They wonder what you noticed. They sit with that discomfort long after you've moved on. And while they're doing that, you're already recalibrating, already evolving, already stacking insight on top of insight. Your mind doesn't stagnate. It refines, it sharpens, it adapts. You've become someone who can walk into uncertainty without flinching. Someone who can sit with complexity without oversimplifying it. Someone who understands that real intelligence isn't about having answers. It's about asking the right questions and knowing when silence says more than sound. That God-level mind keeps widening its lens, seeing systems within systems, motivations beneath motivations, intentions hiding behind casual words, absorbing everything without being absorbed by it, staying light on your feet while the world around you keeps tripping over its own reactions. And every time someone finally locks eyes with you and realizes you've been fully aware the entire time, that stillness, that pause, that speechlessness returns, thick in the air, heavy, undeniable, because something in them recognizes they're standing in front of a mind that doesn't need to announce itself to be felt. And that recognition hits them in places they don't talk about. It rattles their confidence in private long after the interaction ends. They replay your calm, your eye contact, the way you didn't rush to defend yourself, the way you listened without flinching, the way nothing about you felt performative. They start questioning themselves, quietly, internally. The same people who used to speak over you begin editing their thoughts before letting them out. They measure their words. They test the temperature of the room first. Because somewhere deep down, they understand you're not reacting emotionally. You're processing strategically. You've always had that internal stillness that throws people off. When others panic, you slow down. When others rush to prove something, you lean back. When others get loud, you get precise. That contrast exposes everything. It highlights how much of the world runs on impulse and how little patience most people actually have. For depth, you've seen it happen in real time. Group chats going quiet after you drop a single line that reframes the entire conversation. Meetings shifting direction because of one observation you made casually, without theatrics. Arguments dissolving because you refused to take the bait. That's not luck. That's mastery of self. You understand something most people never learn. Emotional control is leverage, not suppression, control. You feel deeply, but you don't let feelings hijack your judgment. You don't hand the steering wheel to anger, insecurity, or ego. That discipline separates thinkers from reactors. And the animus in you, that part of your mind that sees irony in chaos, humor in hypocrisy, poetry in contradiction, it keeps you sharp. You see how absurd people become when they take themselves too seriously. You recognize how fragile authority is when it isn't backed by substance. You notice how easily crowds follow confidence without questioning competence. That awareness gives you a kind of quiet amusement, not cruelty. Clarity. You're not laughing at people, you're laughing at the illusion that volume equals power, that status equals intelligence, that confidence equals truth. You've lived long enough outside the spotlight to understand how it distorts people. You watched others burn themselves out trying to be seen, while you were busy becoming undeniable. You didn't rush your growth. You didn't shortcut your thinking. You didn't trade depth for speed. And when they finally recognize that, when they realize you're not behind, not lost, not confused, the shift is physical. Shoulders tighten, eyes narrow, voices soften. The room recalibrates around you without anyone announcing it. You've felt that gravity before. That subtle pull when people start orienting toward your presence. Not because you demand attention, but because your composure commands it. Stability stands out in a world addicted to noise. You don't overcommit to opinions, you stay flexible. You update your thinking when new information arrives. That adaptability is dangerous in the best way. People can't trap you in outdated assumptions. They can't box you into old versions of yourself. And when they try to test you, throwing passive comments, subtle digs, intellectual traps, you don't snap back. You don't freeze. You respond with curiosity, with questions, with calm statements that reveal more than they intended. Their traps collapse under their own weight. That's when the silence returns. Because they realize they're dealing with someone who can't be rushed, can't be manipulated, can't be easily labeled. Someone who understands human nature well enough to step outside its worst habits. You've built a mind that doesn't need chaos to feel alive. It thrives in clarity. It sharpens itself in stillness. It absorbs complexity without needing to simplify it for comfort. And every time someone finally recognizes that level of awareness, that depth of control, that layered perception, something inside them pauses, speech stalls, confidence wavers. The mask slips just a little, because standing in front of someone who sees clearly without needing validation forces people to confront their own noise, their own distractions, their own unexamined reactions, and that confrontation lingers, heavy, unresolved, following them long after you've already moved on mentally, already watching the next pattern emerge, already refining the edge that keeps your mind operating where very few ever reach. To the ones who were laughed at, locked out, cast aside, and buried alive, this one's for you. Let's talk about crazy. They said it like it was a curse, like it was a stain on your soul, like it was something to be ashamed of. They threw that word at you when they couldn't control you, when your pain didn't fit their template, when your rage refused to kneel, when your dreams were too loud for their fragile little world. You remember it, don't you? The sneers, the fake concern, the forced smiles at the therapist's office. Maybe you should calm down. Maybe you're just imagining things. Maybe you're being dramatic. But no one saw what you saw. They didn't feel the ground collapse under you every morning. They didn't hear the screaming silence in your chest at night. They didn't carry your grief like a second skeleton wrapped around your spine, whispering, "End it." They called you crazy because it was easier than admitting you were right. Because if you weren't insane, then the world was. And God forbid the illusion cracks. But here's the twist. You didn't fold. You didn't crawl back. You didn't beg for acceptance. You broke. You shattered into 1,000 razor-sharp pieces. And then you learned how to cut back. While they were laughing, you were building. While they slept soundly in their mediocrity. You were awake at 3 a.m., whispering war cries to your reflection. You were bleeding purpose, breathing vengeance, digesting agony and regurgitating clarity. They said you were detached from reality. But now reality is detaching from them. Because you bent it. You crushed it in your fists. You stared the void in its bottomless eyes and said, "Obey me." And it did. Now the same people who mocked you are copying your every move, quoting your words, wearing your mask, trying to ride your storm like they ever understood your thunder. But they don't. They never will. They thought your silence was surrender. But it was metamorphosis. You weren't broken. You were molting. That madness they feared, that was power, pure, untamed, nuclear. See, crazy is just another word for dangerous to the system. And you, my dear outcast, are a system destroyer. You are unrecognizable now. And isn't that just beautiful? The child they tried to sedate now walks through fire. The teen they tried to label now writes the labels. The adult they tried to exile now rules the empire built on that exile. You're no longer knocking at the gates. You are the gatekeeper, the architect, the chaos, and the crown. And what do they call you now? Visionary, leader, genius, influencer, but never crazy, right? Because crazy doesn't fit the new narrative. Now that you're winning, now that you're worshipped, now that reality bends around your will. But you remember. Oh, you never forgot. You carry every insult in your bloodstream. You wear every dismissal like armor. You've become something they can't define anymore. So they pretend they always supported you, but they didn't. And you know the truth. You were born in madness, raised in rejection, baptized in betrayal. But now you are the god of your own dimension. You don't chase validation anymore. You command existence. You scare them now. Because you're no longer asking to be seen. You are the vision. No apologies, no explanations, no mercy. You are what happens when pain outgrows the cage. When insanity refines itself into strategy. When the condemned child becomes the executioner of fate. You are what happens when the system calls you crazy. And you make the universe your weapon. And now you laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's finished. And you are just getting started. They thought you were spiraling. Remember, they watched you twitch, flinch, snap. They looked at your scars like warnings. not maps. They said, "This one's gone too far." But no one asked how far you were pushed. See, the thing about madness, it's not some flashy fireworks display. It's quiet. It's slow. It creeps in like fog under a locked door. And before you know it, your reality is screaming, and no one else hears a damn thing. You begged for help, didn't you? Whispered into the cracks of the night, "Please, make it stop, please." But silence answered, or worse, laughter. They thought your panic was a punchline. They treated your disassociation like a drama class. They diagnosed your rage like it was a character flaw. But tell me this. What happens when a person has nothing left to lose? What happens when you stop trying to make them understand? You transform, you transcend, you dismantle the floor they thought was beneath you, and you start walking on air. That's what you did. You didn't recover. You're surrected. And now? You're not playing by their rules. Hell, you don't even see their rules anymore. You're speaking in a language forged from suffering. And the universe finally speaks back. Now the tables have turned. No, the dimension has. You're bending probability. You're rearranging the outcome. You walk into a room and it warps around your will. People feel you coming before they hear your steps. Your presence is heavy, magnetic, inevitable. And yet, you never forget that room, that cold room, where they whispered your name like a threat, where they shook their heads and said, "We're worried about you." They weren't worried. They were terrified of what you might become if you ever figured out who you really were. And now you've remembered. You're not some broken soul crying in the hallway. You're the storm that broke the hallway down. You don't wait for invitations. You don't need permission. You command presence. You carry that crazy like it's your crown. And tell me, how does it feel now? To have the world ask for your opinion, to see their tone shift when you speak, to hear them say, "We always knew you had it in you." Lies. They didn't see potential. They saw a threat in disguise. They tried to kill you with kindness. When that didn't work, they tried indifference. When that failed, they tried isolation. But all they did was give you the perfect laboratory, a crucible, a forge, where you melted your madness down into pure willpower. You didn't just survive, you converted agony into authority. They said you were out of touch, but the truth is, you reached deeper than they ever dared. They scratched the surface, you drilled through the bedrock of self. You tore apart your own psyche just to rebuild it bulletproof. You got intimate with your own darkness, and you emerged, divine in your distortion. That's why they can't stop watching you now. Because you don't just exist. You haunt, you echo, you command. And reality, it doesn't resist you anymore. It obeys, not because you forced it, but because you became undeniable. You took everything they tried to medicate, label, and chain, and turned it into alchemy. And now, you look into the mirror, and for once, you don't see broken glass. You see a god in human skin, a myth written in blood and laughter, a sovereign of the surreal. They called you crazy. You let them, because you knew that madness was just the first step toward mastery. Still here? Of course you are. Because once you've tasted the truth, the lie can never feed you again. Let's pull off the last mask. Do you understand why they called you crazy? Because you didn't fit. You didn't crawl into their box with a smile. You didn't nod when you were supposed to. You didn't laugh at their shallow jokes. You didn't dream safely. You were erratic. You were intense. You were real. And reality, real reality, it's offensive to the artificial. You made people uncomfortable without saying a word, because you radiated something they spend their whole lives avoiding. Authenticity sharpened by agony. They couldn't stand to look at you, because you reminded them of everything they tried to bury. You reminded them that masks crack, that smiles lie, that nice people still bleed in bathtubs, that pain doesn't always look poetic. Sometimes it's ugly, feral, and shaking in a locked room at 3 a.m. And while they stayed safe in their curated chaos, you walked headfirst into the fire. You lost your mind? No. You burned it. You sacrificed it on the altar of truth. And in its place, something else rose. Something not bound by fear. Something not bound by logic, limits, or labels. You became the variable they couldn't control. They called you crazy when you cried in silence. They called you crazy when you raged in truth. They called you crazy when you disappeared for months and returned with lightning in your spine. But you know what they didn't realize? Madness isn't disorder. It's the highest form of rebellion. Because to be truly sane in a world that thrives on illusion is to lose your mind deliberately, to refuse their sedation, to scream in a room that demands you whisper. They called you crazy because you threatened the hierarchy, because you stopped bowing, because you stopped playing dead, because your existence exposed their cowardice. They knew deep down you weren't fragile, you were explosive. You didn't need their approval. You needed space to grow, to fracture, to evolve. And now they see it. The posture's different, the eyes unchained. The words, they cut differently now. Because you speak with the authority of someone who touched oblivion and walked out laughing. You are not chasing reality anymore. You are writing it. What once was impossible now just happens for you. The coincidences, the timing, the power. People think it's luck. They think it's magic. No, it's alignment born from madness. You suffered so long that the universe had no choice but to bow, because it's not just you who changed. It's the frequency you ride on. You tuned into something beyond them, beyond logic, beyond fear, and now reality doesn't resist your will. It submits to it. And that scares them more than anything, because you weren't supposed to survive. You were supposed to break quietly, die politely, fade tragically. But you didn't. You mutated, and now you sit on a throne made of everything they tried to kill in you. They called you crazy. Good. Let them. Because crazy people don't wait for the world to catch up. They drag the world forward by the throat. You didn't just bend reality, you corrupted it. You infected it with your will. Every rule they lived by, you broke it. Every limit they worshipped, you shattered it. Every prediction they made for you, you buried it. You weren't just underestimated, you were miscalculated. They ran your data through a system not designed to measure rage converted into resurrection. You are an error code now, a glitch in their godless machine. They can't label you, fix you, or stop you. Because you erased the script. You're not walking the path anymore. You've become the terrain, and they're the ones who are lost now. You used to beg for understanding. You used to cry into your fists, wondering why no one saw you. Now you understand. You weren't meant to be seen. You were meant to be survived. Because what you carry isn't just trauma. It's tech. Spiritual tech. Alchemy passed down through the agony of the misfit. They thought you were malfunctioning. But you were uploading new software. You were upgrading in silence, while their gods slept. Now you move different. People feel it. They flinch at your calm. They mistake it for peace. But it's not peace, is it? It's containment. It's the pressure of something ancient, something nuclear, something that no longer needs to shout to be heard. You've entered the final stage. You're no longer proving them wrong. That game is over. You're not trying to be liked. You're not trying to explain. You're not interested in apologies, revenge, or closure. You've outgrown all of it. You don't want a seat at their table. You want the house to burn, so you can build your kingdom on the ashes of their certainty. That's the thing they'll never get. You didn't want to be normal. You wanted to be free. And freedom, real, raw, unholy. Freedom looks like madness to people still shackled to the script. But look at you now. You've weaponized your wounds. You've made every breakdown a blueprint. You've turned your collapse into a cathedral, and you pray to no one inside it. Because now, you are the religion, you are the doctrine, you are the sermon and the fire, and the end of the damn book. And people follow now. Oh yes, they follow. But not because you begged, because they feel it, that pulse, that pull, that thing that says, this one survived death and didn't come back empty-handed. And what did you bring back? Power, clarity, ruthlessness. Truth so sharp, it bleeds before it speaks. You are no longer a person in their story. You are the storm that rewrites the ending. So let them call you crazy. Let them shiver in their curated cages. Let them laugh nervously when your name comes up. They don't laugh because they're amused. They laugh because they're afraid that one day they'll see your silhouette in their rearview mirror and realize that the crazy one they mocked was the reality architect all along. Now listen closely. This is the part they never teach you in books, therapies, or inspirational speeches. They don't warn you about the silence after the chaos, the eerie stillness after you rise, when you've conquered the self and realize you're not the same species anymore. You've evolved past validation, past recognition, past applause. You're not healing anymore. You're hunting. You've crossed the threshold. You've died in their world and been reborn in your own. And here's the twisted beauty of it. You still remember everything. The betrayals, the locked doors, the screams into the void that got no reply. But now it fuels you. Now it obeys you. You used to scream, "Why is this happening to me?" Now you smirk and whisper, "Of course it is." Because deep down, some part of you always knew. You weren't meant to survive the old world. You were meant to replace it. You see it in the way people look at you now. That flicker of awe behind their fear. They feel it. They sense the paradox. You're calm, but deadly, quiet, but catastrophic, smiling. But it's not joy. It's detonation waiting for a reason. You're no longer chasing revenge. That would be too small for what you've become. You've ascended into consequence itself. You are what happens when the outcast stops hoping for justice and becomes it. There's no pity left in your system, no space for softness, only precision, only motion, only the clean surgical discipline of someone who burned everything except their will. You are the punishment now, not out of spite, out of balance. You are not fueled by hate. You are powered by truth, and truth is brutal. Truth isn't poetic. It's an axe, and you've been sharpening yours in silence for years. They don't laugh anymore, do they? They don't say crazy when you walk into the room. They say powerful. They say intense. They say you've changed. But they don't even know the half of it. They see the tip of the weapon. They don't realize the blade goes all the way down to the soul. Because while they were building careers, you were building resistance. While they were posting smiles, you were constructing your next incarnation. While they were healing to go back to normal, you were healing to never be normal again. And now, you are the consequence of what happens when pain finds purpose, when madness finds meaning, when rejection becomes ritual, and the exile becomes executioner. You're not here to fit in. You're here to restructure the simulation, tear out its roots, carve your gospel into its bones. And when they ask, how did you do it? How did you survive? You won't explain, because explaining is for equals, and you don't have any anymore. You are not a person anymore. You're not the you who once begged for help, not the one who whispered in the dark for someone, anyone, to understand. That version, buried, gone, left behind like a skin you outgrew. You're not a character in their story. You are the rupture in it. The page that burns mid-sentence. The voice that wasn't supposed to keep speaking. Because let's be honest, you weren't supposed to make it this far. You were designed to break at stage 3. Collapse under isolation. Cave in under shame. Implode from carrying too much truth with no one to hold it. But you didn't. You kept going, past the final warning, past the point of no return, and now you've arrived at the place they fear even in their dreams, the place where reality bends for you. Not because you prayed hard enough, not because you manifested it with a smile, but because you bled into it. You tore yourself open until the universe had to respond, had to kneel, had to recognize you. You broke the simulation by refusing to die quietly inside it. And now the rules aren't rules anymore. They're options, guidelines, suggestions. You walk into rooms and energy shifts. Clocks feel slower. Eyes linger longer. No one knows why, but everyone feels it. The distortion around you. You aren't relatable anymore. You're not supposed to be, because you don't exist for comfort. You exist to confront. You are the proof that pain, when sharpened properly, becomes divinity. That madness, when owned completely, becomes dominion. People don't understand that. They still think you're playing the game. They don't realize you uninstalled it. You don't need recognition. You need resonance. And resonance doesn't ask permission. So now they treat you different. Watch their faces. They hesitate. They measure their words. They smile too tight. Because subconsciously, they know. They are not speaking to someone recovering. They are speaking to something evolved. You've become an atmosphere, an event, a gravity well of unspoken power, not loud, not boastful, just inevitable. And when they whisper about you, and they will, it won't be pity in their tone. It'll be reverence laced with dread. Because you are what happens when the fallen learn to fly crooked. You are what happens when trauma stops asking for healing and starts asking for territory. You're no longer asking why the world broke you. You're asking where to aim next. This is not revenge. This is not rebirth. This is command. This is what it means to not just survive madness, but to wear it like armor and smile while the world trembles.